the offspring of faith will not only be just, but also good and profoundly so. Prayer will be of happiness and praise, and the houses of worship will be consecrated to the sublime work of supreme fraternity. The preaching of the law will live in the deeds and thoughts of all, because the Lamb of God will have transformed the hearts of every individual into a temple of eternal light, wherein his divine kingdom will forever shine.
So, dear brothers and sisters, with the words of Emmanuel resonating in our minds, understanding that the divine laws one day shall be used here as the basis of our society, all of us following it, then there would be no need for any of those violence, acts of war that we see in war. Let us all together at this moment ask our spiritual friends to help us during this morning, our mentors, our guides, everyone that comes here for help, all the people that could not be here today but are united in thought with us and following the lecture. And we ask our Master Jesus, through his teachings, allow us at this moment to open our minds to the words that are going to be spoken here this morning. So maybe these thoughts and ideas of discipline and love could be more and more incorporated in our own soul, in who we are, in our actions. And may Joe be blessed so he can deliver the message to us and we can actually put it to practice. And now we thank your Father, Mother, God for the opportunity of being here today. Thank you very much, and so be it. So, my dear friends, we're having this special day with the Lunch and Learn. Joe will give us the lecture, and then right after the lecture, we're going to have the lunch, and we ask for a contribution for the lunch, but everyone's welcome to stay independently of that. I would like to invite Joe to come and start his beautiful lecture on the life and discipline and dedication of Emmanuel and Chico. Joe.
Hello, good morning. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you here in this wonderful, hot, long weekend. And I'm very pleased that you've chosen to spend a little bit of that weekend here with us. Calling today's presentation a lecture is a bit too much. I'm not going to lecture you today. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story about two very special spirits, Emmanuel and Chico Xavier. I believe most of you here would have already known who they are, but hopefully I will be able to give you some new information, a little bit more insight, and bring forth some points why they were so crucial and why we talk about them and why they were important. I think it's very safe to say that after the early inspirers and codifiers of Spiritism, Kardec, Leon Denis, no two spirits had more importance in fundamentally moving forward the Spiritist doctrine than Chico Xavier and Emmanuel. And we'll see, hopefully today, that this did not happen at chance. It was not an accident. It was not something that it just happened. It was a long planning work that has taken thousands of years to occur. So let's get started in the story. Emmanuel. Emmanuel is a word, a name, that typically means God is with us. right? Emmanuel means inside. El means God. It comes from the old Jewish language. And we know Emmanuel because he was the spiritual mentor of Francisco Cândido Xavier, Chico Xavier. What does it mean to be a spiritual mentor? We all have or spiritual guides, right? That help us every day, that inspire us, that warns us that we're possibly not doing the right things that we should be doing. But in this case, a spiritual mentor has a much bigger role. It's a job. It is a very important mission that Emmanuel took upon and accepted as his role in assisting Chico Xavier. And he was by far the most important and influential spirit in the life of Chico Xavier. She could see many spirits. He talked to many of them. He psychographed quite a few number of different spirits. But as we will see, all of this work, all of these activities were coordinated and driven by Emmanuel. He was like Chico's agent, if you may, in organizing all of this interaction with the various spirits that Chico could see. He was entrusted, and the word entrusted is important. He had great responsibility. As I said before, Chico fundamentally changed the way that Spiritism was understood and impacted in Brazil. And Brazil was selected as the place that was going to hold that role in the world, as we were going to two very great wars in the beginning of the 20th century. And Chico had then this responsibility of ensuring that he would continue to get out the message that so importantly and well started in the time of Kardec. So entrusted with this role, Emmanuel interacted with Chico for most of his life. We'll see that Chico meets him. He's a little bit older, but Emmanuel was already with Chico from the moment that he was born. And he was, for Chico, a constant presence. He was a teacher. And Chico himself will see in his words how we saw Emmanuel as his teacher. He was a mentor. He motivated Chico to do the work. Remember that Chico is what we call a missionary medium. Is one of those few persons in existence over the last couple of centuries that have come to this earth incarnated with a mission to become a communicator, to become a medium of importance, to help everyone else, including us, in everything we study, move forward our understanding of what Spiritism is, but more importantly, who we are. He was also a collaborator. We know that many books that Chico psychographed, Emmanuel was the author. So they collaborated. And the word collaborate is important because as we understand how psychography works, there is a part of the medium that's being put into those words as well. The way he expresses the thoughts, the ideas that the Spirit is giving him is that contribution that the medium provides in that process. Chico was always very humble. He never accepted any recognition of any role in the content, but we know that that's not true. And he was a friend. Imagine, missionary mediums, they live a fairly, in some ways, busy life. They have lots of people around them, but most of the time they are working by themselves. It is a harsh, lonely life in many aspects. And for these mediums, their spiritual guide becomes possibly their best friend. They interact with that spirit possibly more than they interact with any other live spirit or incarnated spirit around them. So it's a very intimate relationship in terms of getting to know each other, getting to understand expectations. And as I said, Chico himself recognized that throughout his life and his mediumship career, he had many ups and downs like we all do. And in many of those situations, it is Emmanuel who lifts Chico out of the difficult times. So Emmanuel continued to work with Chico all the way until 1998, and we'll see when that starts. Because at that time, he himself was getting ready for another reincarnation. And I'll have more information about that. Now, Emmanuel is the theme of the month. I can't believe we're already in August, but we are in August. Summer is flying by, and please enjoy, because before you sneeze, it's over. And then soon the leaves will fall. When you see those first orange leaves come up, you get the feeling that time is of an essence. But he is the theme of the month, Chico and Emmanuel. So we have 5 weeks talking about Emmanuel. So please take advantage of that. So before I talk a little bit more about Emmanuel, just let's recap what I think most people might know here, is that Chico began to psychograph. He was born in 1910, and by the age 17, he was he's feeling his mediumship coming, right? He begins to write some psychographies at the time. Still very early. It takes him years, actually, to become fluent the way he became. And he began, his first book was called The Parnaso do Além Túmulo, which, for those who don't speak Portuguese, is a collection of literary short stories, but mostly poems, that were dictated to Chico Xavier by dead poets, both Portuguese and Brazilian, but mostly Portuguese poets. And when Chico publishes this book, years later, it becomes a great controversy and success, because they could not understand how a 17-year-old could write so many different poems in so many different styles that a lot of experts could not distinguish this from the original works of those authors. And true enough, it's because they will continue to write. What Chico did not know at the time is that this activity, this initial work he was doing, and the collaboration he was having with these poets, was already organized by Emmanuel. He finds that out many years later. But Emmanuel was already working behind the scenes, but he could not yet come to Chico because Chico was not ready. And when is Chico ready? Well, it takes a few years. It takes him another 4 years of practicing the psychography with those spirits before Emmanuel finally comes up and he shows himself to Chico. And it's one of those life-changing moments for Chico, because he sees the spirit. He is dressed as a Roman senator, or in what looked like to be ancient Roman clothing. He is an older man, very wise. And he comes to Chico and starts telling him a whole bunch of things. Now, this is a 21-year-old boy, right? Young man. And what Emmanuel tells him is that, Chico, what you just experienced for the last 4 years, this was just practice. This was just a little taste of what you have in store for your whole life. And he describes to Chico basically what's going to be Chico's life. But of course, he doesn't want to scare Chico too much. So he says, Chico, we're here in the spiritual world. We've been thinking about you, and we'd like you to write a few books with us, just like you've done with the Parnaso. We're going to have a few more. And Chico says, sure. How many do I need? 2, 3? And, he says, well, at least 30. 30, Chico says. How can that be possible? I'm very poor. My father barely can put food on the table. How are we going to pay for paper and pen and pencil for me to write 30 books? And then Emmanuel says, don't worry. it will be taken care of for you. You have to have faith and trust that if you accept this mission, that you will have everything you need to accomplish it. And Chico says, well, he's talking to an older spirit. He says, okay, sure. 30 is okay. I can do 30. But what do you need from me? And we know the story. Emmanuel says, you need 3 things. And Chico says, good, tell me the first thing. You need discipline. Okay, I think I can do that. The second thing, you need discipline. More discipline? Okay, why not? And what's the last thing? Well, of course, it's discipline. And the word discipline is important because that is the main requirement of a missionary medium. Because life happens. Imagine yourself, 21 years old, thinking of all of the challenges and difficulties. You come from a poor family. You just completed only your primary school. Right? You think about, I need to get a job, I have to work, I have to help my family, maybe get married, have kids, and then suddenly everything is turned upside down for you. And now you have somebody coming from the spiritual world giving you news that your life has been planned differently. Of course, Chico doesn't realize is that he himself participated in this planning. None of us are called upon to do things in a life that we have in some ways not already agreed to prior to reincarnating. Chico doesn't know much about Spiritism. He's been learning, right? And because he's been getting help from family friends that practice Spiritism. So he's just trying to, he's just dipping his toes into the Spiritist lake. And now he is flabbergasted. He is totally overwhelmed. But he accepts the mission for 30 books. We will see that Emmanuel was being very gentle with Chico at the time because it was a little bit more than 30 books. It was 30, but it was 430 books that eventually Chico wrote during his lifetime. But before we go on and talk a little bit about the body of work that the two created, and it's a gift to us, let's talk about Emmanuel himself, right? So Emmanuel, in his book, Emmanuel, and other books that he psychographed later on with Chico, gives a lot of hints or describes his life experience. So he's teaching us how to be better spirits, better individuals, through his own life story. And I'll show you some of the books that describe that. But in other cases, some of the other lives he had, we only know because Chico would tell people of his friendship what he heard Emmanuel tell him. So Emmanuel tells Chico a lot because, as I said, they were best friends and they had constant communication. So he talked about all his lives. The first one that we have information about is Simas. So Simas is a grand priest in the old Egyptian dynasties, right? He was born in Thebes. He was a rector, a principal at the university in Tanis. And he was a priest at the time where, if you know a little bit about the Egyptian history, the Egyptians worshipped many gods. And the gods were half man, half animal, and they were still pluraltheist. They had many gods. But there was a period of time, there was one pharaoh that tried to introduce the idea of a single god, monotheist practice. And Simas lived in that time. And he, of course, as a spirit, starts to learn these ideas. Eventually, that pharaoh dies very young, and the ideas, and there's controversy whether he was killed because of that or not, because the grand priests were very powerful. And the idea that they would have to change the whole religion because now the pharaoh has this vision that there's only one God, threatened them. And like in many points in our history, sometimes power can't change that quickly. But it is through these experiences, and it's through these failed experiments that happen that certain spirits will come back with that memory and continue the work. So here, the spirit of Emmanuel is getting the first notion that the way that religion was being practiced was probably not correct. It was not a correct vision of what the afterlife was like. The next notion that we have of a life from Emmanuel was as Publio Cornelius Lentulus Suar. He was a consul in the Roman Empire at the time of the first Caesar. And we know him as someone who tried to overthrow the Roman Caesar at the time because he did not agree with the way that the politics were taking place. We don't know exactly if all of his intents were noble or not, or if they followed spiritual intents. But we know that he was a bit of a revolutionary, and he actually gets killed because of that. He is sentenced to death. And he also has a little bit of claim to fame because he was the second husband of Julia, who was the mother of Mark Antony. So you see that he has, in these two lives already, very important roles, both in terms of religious and government roles. So you start to see that he's building up a lot of issues that he's going to have to deal with in terms of pride, power, obviously being a powerful priest or a powerful consul. He made decisions that were in his own self-interest and possibly starts to gather a lot of baggage in terms of things he needs to atone for later on. He comes back as the grandson of Publium, and is also called Publio. Now they changed the names. The Greeks loved doing kind of things. It was Publius Lentulus Cornelius. And this, in fact, is the life that Emmanuel presents himself to Chico. So the image that Chico has and sees Emmanuel is representative of the time that he lived as Publio. Interesting enough, he wasn't called Emmanuel, and we'll find out that as far as we know, none of his incarnations he was called Emmanuel. There's a little bit of a theory around that. But Publio, again, he is a senator, extremely powerful as well. And he lives in a time of Jesus Christ. And there's two stories that come about Publio, and his life is told in the book 2,000 years ago. So if you read this book, you know what all of the life of Publio. But Publio has a couple of stories. One is that his daughter is sick, and his wife insists that he ask this carpenter that's been going around Galilee to help him out and cure the daughter. So he does go, and he does meet Jesus, and his daughter gets well. But he still does not believe in Jesus. But he writes a letter, and you can look up the letter, where he actually describes Jesus Christ. And it's an incredible letter that talks about, how you would get immediately kind of overwhelmed just being in the presence of Jesus. But he still does not believe in all the things that Jesus is saying. In fact, part of the story also says that when Jesus is sentenced to death, he basically is there and does nothing to help Jesus. So talk about creating debts for your future lives, right? We then find him coming back years later in Nestorium, right? He was a Jewish, I have to look here, a Jewish origin, born in Ephesus, and he is the first incarnation of Emmanuel, where he embraces Christianism. He meets John the Evangelist, and then after that meeting, he himself continues to preach Christianism around Asia Minor, right? All of the area of Turkey, the Palestine, all of that region. And he got noticed because he actually is sentenced to death, along with his son, in the Roman circus by the Romans, who were opposed to the rise of Christianism at the time. And this story you'll find in the book 50 years later. A couple of other important lives that we know about. We then have Basilio, and this is now another 100 years later. He is Roman, son of a Greek slaves, but he gets himself freed and becomes a philosopher, right, in the island of Cyprus. He's also converted to Christianism, and again, he is sentenced to death and dies in the French city of Lyon during his preaching. So as we know, this is his third life that he's sentenced to death. First for being a reactionary and a revolutionary, and then twice now for being preaching Christianism. So you start to see a pattern, a path that he's going. He is first an atheist or multi-polyist priest. He then becomes powerful as a government, councils, and senators. He meets Christ but doesn't believe in him. 2 other incarnations, he is killed for believing and preaching the very same ideas that he ignored before. So he's starting to atone for some of that, right? He's going through some challenges and some trials. And so what's left now? Well, the next thing you have to do is come as a father, a religious person within the Catholic Church, to learn more about Christianism. So we have 2 lives, and one, he was the Bishop of Reims in France, and then the Bishop of Sabina, which I believe is in Spain. No, Sabina is Spain. He comes as yet another priest, but now he jumps from country to country. So he's also getting experience of different cultures, different ways that the religion is being preached over different centuries now. He's seeing the modification. But now he comes back as someone that, for those who study Brazilian history, probably remember Manuel de Nóbrega, right? He was a Portuguese priest, a Jesuit, who comes to Brazil to convert the Indians, right? And then he meets Padre Anchieta, Father Anchieta, which is another very important religious figure in early history of Brazil. And the 2 of them become kind of a partner, and they found many of the important cities in Brazil, from Recife, São Paulo. They were putting missions in these places, and these missions would then become the cities that they are today. So what is he learning in this life now? Well, he's doing a lot. First of all, he's preparing Brazil for things to come. He is working with the natives and understanding the process of evangelization, of bringing the true message of Christ to them. And he's learning Portuguese. He continues to do that, but now notice that he's kind of, even though he's still involved in the religious career, if you may, over lives. He was bishop, then he was a Jesuit, an important Jesuit. He then comes back as another priest called Damiano. And this, even though he comes from a good family, like it was the case, many of the priests in Brazil, they usually came from well-to-do families, and they had many kids, and they usually wanted 1 or 2 of the boys to become priests. He, in fact, was a very humble priest. He was never really, a big figure in the church. And what he did in this life, and and Emmanuel tells Chico this. He said, I came as Father Damiano because I wanted to improve my Portuguese, right? And I wanted to have a humbler life. But even so, we know that Father Damiano, even though he goes, like I said, a very non-important life, even within the religious structure, he had written a few things where he started to challenge some of the dogmas. And one of the things that he was in particular interested in was this idea of having plurality of existences, reincarnation. You wonder why then, right? He's already been educated and he's getting himself to understand all of the things that Spiritism bring about. And Spiritism had already been created later in his life, right? No, I'm sorry, not Father Mendes, later on. Oh, I'm talking the wrong person here. Sorry. Father Mendes was a Spanish priest, and again, we know him. We're still in the 17th century here. So everything I just said, you're going to see on another father that he comes later. He then comes back as another priest and educator in France, Jean-Jacques Touville. We don't know much about him, but he was present just before the French Revolution. And he actually runs away to Spain just before the revolution occurs. Father Amaro, that's the one I was talking about. That's the one that's born in Pará, right? Very humble Catholic priest. And he is there to learn Portuguese. And one of the things that's interesting is he actually meets Dr. Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes, who was a great also figure in Brazilian Spiritism. That's the last life that we know of him incarnated until now. Chico tells us before he died that Emmanuel has reincarnated. He is now possibly a young teenager living in the state of São Paulo. He may or may not know who he is. More likely he doesn't. He's still being prepared, but he says he's going to be a very important person in the realm of education. He's going to be involved with some type of education, and he's going to be a very important figure in that. So, recapping what I said early on about this being a plan that's being in the making for thousands of years. You see how a spirit, and by the way, we all are following our own particular but not unlike path. We're going through these experiences, and each one of them brings us a little bit of the puzzle that we're looking for. So Emmanuel goes through great power. And the more he evolves, the more he reincarnates, what do you see? He's becoming intellectual. He becomes more religious, but he becomes more humble as well. He becomes more simple. He begins to understand the importance of the reincarnation of the soul. And you see that he's preparing himself, preparing the ground in Brazil for the work that he would do later on with Chico Xavier. And now that this work is done, he's coming back again in Brazil to continue the process of education. Now, one of the things that, we look at the body of work, we look at the beautiful messages that Emmanuel brings us, and we might think, well, must be a very enlightened spirit. Must be, one of the higher ups, and he's just kind of almost a pure spirit of light. Wrong. Because if he was, he wouldn't be reincarnating again. Right? Not to this level. He is more advanced than us, obviously. He's been at it, he's been planned, and he's had very important missions and roles during his life. I'm going to talk another one that he did in terms of the codification itself. But he is far from being a perfect spirit. He will continue to reincarnate and continue in his path, and so must we. And we must follow his path that he's opening us. That's the important role that Emmanuel is doing for us. He's helping us by trailing this path, and we just need to follow that. And we will find the evolution that he is finding as well. The term Emmanuel, the name Emmanuel, first comes to us actually in one of Kardec's book. In fact, the Gospel According to Spiritism. It is in item 11 of chapter 11 that he writes a kind of, there's spirit explanations, and he writes ones about selfishness. And it's a wonderful text. And I just present a little bit here. And he describes selfishness as being the plague of humankind. Now, do you think that he had an opportunity to be very selfish in his lives? course. That's why he has the authority to write about selfishness. He's made the same mistakes. He has fallen in these same traps as we have. But he's warning us that selfishness is the thing that we have to deal first. It's the most difficult one, and is directly associated with charity. Selfishness is the opposite of charitable. And I like the last part here. It says that selfishness is the target at which all true believers must aim their weapons. So he puts this in kind of a war kind of analogy. Their strength and their courages. Okay, and he says, I say courage, their courage, because more courage is required to overcome oneself than to overcome other people. And we've done lectures about courage here, and yes, we also always see the word courage about being strong against attacks, against other people, against bad ideas, and so forth. But what Emmanuel is telling us is that the courage that we must have is to transform ourselves. Don't try to transform others. Transform yourself first, and you will be the example by which others will follow you. And Emmanuel has shown this throughout his reincarnations. And that's the reason we learn about them. Not to put him in a pedestal or to find out that he's perfect, but the opposite. To find out that he was and continues to be imperfect. But he is working on it. He is working in his path. And he has had very important missions along the way. So this was one of them. But to us, in particular, his mission with Chico was fundamental. So, before I go on to the next slide, how many people have read books by Emmanuel? Okay, how many have read at least 2 books by Emmanuel? 5, 10, 20, 20. Okay, how many books do you think Emmanuel wrote with Chico? 110, not 220. So Chico wrote 400 books in his lifetime. A quarter of them were authored by Emmanuel. And he had complete coordination of the other 300 and so books. And these 200 books, or these 100 books, gives us a wealth of information. It is a body of work unlike any other. Right? It talks about a historical series. So we'll see there's a number of books that he talks about the Roman Empire, about the life of Christ. Paul and Stephen, who has not read that book, and it is always a crowd favorite. There's a lot of books around those 100 that talks about the mediumship practice, what it is, how to do it, how to be careful with how that is done. Spiritism, teaching us, explaining the codification works, the Kardec books, providing new views and new ways of doing this. It is inspirational. Daily Bread. We read it here every week on the public lectures, during our activities. Right? Guidance, charity, love, and self-improvement are constant themes that permeate all. Some words that show in many of titles of his book are light and love. So Emmanuel, through Chico, is giving us directions of where we need to go. And directions start by what? Overcoming selfishness, which he wrote to us even before he started working with Chico. A couple of things that it's interesting. He told Chico, listen, right? I'm going to be working with you a long time. I'm going to be telling you lots and lots of things. But remember that above all, seek the teachings of Jesus and the lessons of Allan Kardec. And if I, being an imperfect spirit, ever tell you something that you believe goes against Jesus' teaching, goes against Allan Kardec, you have to forget me. Because those are the real important directions that you have followed. Of course, that never happened. But he was putting himself, again, in a very humble role. That I'm here doing the best I can, but I can fail. I'm still a spirit in evolution. And if you think that I'm doing wrong, please make your own decision and follow the words of Jesus, the lessons of Allan Kardec. And we know that that is also a fundamental principle in Spiritism. We have our free will to discern what people are telling us. If we get a communication from a spirit and it doesn't sound right, we do not have to follow blindly. In fact, we are not allowed to follow it blindly. We need to take everything that we've learned, and that's why it's important to learn, to make a decision whether to accept that idea or not. And when in doubt, where do we go back to? Well, first, we'll go back to Chico Xavier and Emmanuel. If we're still not sure, we go back to Kardec. And of course, we always go back to the gospel and the words of Jesus, because we can't go wrong with that. In fact, Emmanuel's body of work, even though it's 110 books, there's around, we saw it, between 10 and 20 books here that are basically in any Spiritist favorite list or mandatory list. And a number of them have been translated to English, and thank you for the work that EGISE and the International Spiritist Council is doing to translate more and more of these books. So right now they have these 9 books translated. We have them all here for those who like to buy, and they're in the back if you want to have a look. But, Living Spring, inspirational, right? We, Sandra and I, use this every week in our gospel at home. Right? The Way, the Truth, and the Life. We have the historical series here, Paul and Stephen, 2,000 years ago, 50 years later. These talk about his experience during those times. Yes, Hail Christ as well, right? Part of that. Renunciation. So all of these are essential reading for anybody interested in Spiritism. And they have been handpicked to be the first to be translated in English for that very same reason. So a couple of quotes from Emmanuel, or from Chico about Emmanuel. So Chico says, requested to pronounce on this or that issue, I always notice in him the highest degree of tolerance, kindness, and gentleness, treating all problems with the utmost respect for freedom and the ideas of others. So he was a strict teacher, but he respected Chico's free will and questions and his state of evolution. We're not supposed to know everything. We have the right to be wrong and to make mistakes. The important thing is what happened when that is called upon, and that's what he was telling, that Emmanuel had this intense patience with Chico, and Chico would always tell stories how he would disappoint Emmanuel. Emmanuel would come back and guide him step a step of how to move forward. And here is a crucial one. He says, Emmanuel has been for me a true father in the spiritual life, but the affection that he tolerates failure, he talks about that again, and goodness with repeating the lessons that I must learn. So Chico was saying, I'm kind of stupid, man. I have to learn 3-4 times. And of course, we're like that as well, right? We need to go through and suffer and learn the same lesson multiple times in this life and multiple lives before and after this one. In all of these years of close fellowship, almost daily, and back to the point that they were always together, he provided me with programs, study times. So this goes back to the discipline. When he said that Chico needed to provide discipline, yes, Chico provided the will to be disciplined, but it was Emmanuel who gave Chico how that discipline would actually work in practice. That in the beginning, even including how to learn to type and grammar. Remember, Chico only had primary, and he goes on to say, looking to develop my simple knowledge from primary school in Pedro Leopoldo. All I've completed in the official educational field. So this is important because we need always to remember that the medium is not a machine that's just kind of typing and replacing or writing down what the spirit is dictating. Spirits often, almost always, talk in terms of ideas, thoughts. The medium needs to be able to translate this into words. So Emmanuel knew that. Emmanuel knew that Chico did not have all the skills that he would need. Let's go back to 1931. What did Emmanuel tell Chico? If Chico accepted the mission, what would happen? Everything that he needed will be provided to him. And it was. Throughout his life, he continued to psychograph these 400 books. For several years, right after when he began, he had a small Spiritist group. And for a number of reasons, ended up being he was the only one that was left in the group. And he told, Emmanuel says, well, I'm not going to go there because I'm the only one. Emmanuel said, no. You're not the only one. There are many spirits that you can't see yet, and you will, but there are many spirits who come to listen to you. And as you speak, you teach them and you teach yourself these lessons that you must learn. And for several years, it was Chico by himself, working in the Spiritist Center, doing the mediumship meetings. And that's how we also learn. We learn by dedication. We learn by being patient, forgiving ourselves for the things we don't know and the mistakes we make, and just looking forward to continue our path. Emmanuel has had his path over 2,000 years, and if we could look back in each one of our lives, we would find that we have not come here today by chance. It has been an evolution. We have not become Spiritists in this life, maybe previous life, but we have not become Spiritists overnight. And when I say overnight, is in the big kind of eternal timeline of our existence. We have been preparing for this. We have had mistakes. We have suffered for those mistakes. We have learned. Maybe it took a few lives to learn. That has brought us here. And that is the certainty that we have that we can continue to move on. And it's this lesson that Chico gives us in most of his books. That there is a path, that it is doable. And as he himself was given everything that he needed to complete his mission, so will we. We will be given all that we need to continue our evolution. So what are the three things we need? Thank you. Before I finish, I just wanted to continue that we will have 4 more lectures this month on Emmanuel. Next week is going to be in Portuguese, Justiça Divina, Divine Justice, by Denise. On the 16th, we have Teresa Torres. Is it Alms? Is that the title? Okay. On the 23rd, we have on one of the books, one of the great books, On the Way of the Light to the Light, that is by Emmanuel. And finally, we're kind of, we're not ashamed to admit it, we're copying the TED Talks. So rather than having one speaker here, we'll have 2 or 3 speakers talking. And I think 3. Who's the third one? Tiago. So it wasn't in our list, but so we have 3 different speakers, each one giving a short lecture about Emmanuel, 15 minutes each or 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. I won't hold you much more. There's great food waiting for all of us. And we'll call. You're going to finish?
Yeah, I'm just. Marco was the one.
Yeah, so call Marco and he bring little Angel Daniel. Thank you very much. Anybody has any questions that I can answer before? Reading Emmanuel in English is quite interesting for those who have read in Portuguese. The translations are exceptionally well done. and it helps us also get a bit of the language of Spiritism in English that we might not have yet good practice on. So for those who are starting or wanting to continue their Spiritism learning in English, these are the best books for you to get started.
Yeah, they're all on the table. If you want to just take a look at them. We just put one of each, but we have more there.
Let's do the final prayer.
No, questions and
I
answers.
just did what you were
Oh, sorry. Okay.
waiting. Matthew. Thank you very much.
Thank
So thank you, Joe, for the great lecture. It's very nice always to look. Yeah.
Yes.
You gotta be here? Say, be here. It's very nice to do a little overview on Emmanuel again. Okay, you wanna come up? Okay, let's go. Okay, the books. Yeah, see, everyone's staring at you now. Look. And I would like to thank you all for coming once again. It's lunch and learn time, so we're going to be serving lunch soon. But before we do that, of course, we're going to have our final prayer. And we don't have individual passages today, but during the prayer, of course, if you keep your mind thinking about elevated thoughts and Jesus and God, certainly you receive the help that you want. And as Sandra said, there are going to be books here for sale. Many of the books that were mentioned today. Emmanuel has different, as you heard today, there are different themes on his writings, basically. So you can go through. They're all amazing. The historical books are phenomenal. Probably the best ones available in all literature. Let's then have a prayer. I don't want to delay it anymore, and then we can go have lunch. So let us all at this moment close our eyes, find a comfortable position for us. Let us imagine the life of Emmanuel as this pathway of evolution, going through trials, going through difficult times, and trying at every single situation to excel, to improve, to be a better person. Let us imagine ourselves in the same pathway, doing little steps every single time we come to this planet, with trials and errors, getting some things right, but still many things wrong. And let us just imagine that very soon we'll be better. So let's ask for our Master Jesus to help us along this road, guiding our steps, illuminating our thoughts, with the help of our spiritual friends, and with the blessings of our Father, Mother, God. May we all leave here today with a little bit more of this beautiful energy that flows from above and connect us all. Let us love one another, my friends. That is the message. Thank you very much, and so be it. All right, so let's get set up for lunch. And just remember, guys, that we have our meetings on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights, and we're doing our summer book study. If you guys want to go on our website and check, it's a great opportunity. And this is the Emmanuel month, and I hope to see you all again here on Sunday. Thank you very much. Let's get ready for lunch.